Our Inheritance Was Left to Us by No Testament, an exhibition of 7 of the most important female artists working in post-war Europe. These women didn't just break from tradition, they created a novel tradition and an art historical legacy, the legacy which we now call the Eastern European Avant-Garde. It was a moment which inspired new practices and forms of making in Eastern Europe, and with Levitus-Swiderska's The Blurry Space, the work which begins our exhibition, we see this captured in a 3-dimensional form. And this is the first time we have shown Levitus' work in London, marking our presentation of her estate and showing her unique practice, which incorporates new forms and shapes and materials. Levitus used tree branches, bark, plastic, sisal, and wool. Next to Levitus-Swiderska is the work of the Czech artist Bela Kolárova. Again, like many Eastern European artists, Kolárova was a victim of Cold War isolationism, and so her exposure, and hence her international reputation, lags 30 years behind where it should be. We are showing 2 works by Kolárova in our exhibition. The first, Variation 2 Triangles 4, uses small button snaps, cheap components readily available to her in communist Czechoslovakia. She creates an abstract composition, almost optical in design. Kolárova made this work at a time when she was living under the rigidity of the totalitarian regime, and the very use of fasteners is a subversive reference to the domestic sphere, to mending and tailoring, tasks which were historically the domain of the female. The second work, Business Cards, Diary from a Week in the Mountains, is from her makeup series, which she began in 1976 and continued to work on through the early 1980s. From Kolárova, we move on to Renate Bertelmann's humorous and kitsch appropriation of a found object, a dildo, in Throwing Knife from 1980. Renate is one of Austria's most important feminist artists. She most recently represented Austria at the 2019 Venice Biennale. With Throwing Knife, you can see her very humorous appropriation of the dildo, which she's decorated with rhinestones and glitter, and at the very tip, a razor blade emerges. She's very much poking fun of the idea that the phallus should be glorified and placed on a pedestal. Like the work on paper in Gallery 2, Slipped Over Boar's Cycle, the phallus again takes central stage, although here in this drawing, it is less a phallus and more a worm. This work represents a shift in her practice and can be viewed as a precursor of sorts for the Throwing Knife. The second fiber sculptress and surprise in our exhibition is Jolanta Awicka. We are showing one of her most important works, Warsaw, an abstract cityscape of the city which was executed in 1967. Growing up behind the Iron Curtain, Awicka had a particular fascination with the role of fabric within contemporary residential interiors and architecture. It's interesting because Poland has a 1,000-year history of tapestries, their early purpose obviously more functional than decorative. By the close of World War II, Poland was a leader in the field of fiber art and can be considered the birthplace of true fiber sculpture, setting tapestry free from its 2-dimensional constraints and utilizing new and unusual materials. With Warsaw, we see this epitomized. Awicka combines elements of ancient tapestry using a modern woven form and the floating yarn, which Awicka pioneered. A particular highlight and an incredibly important piece of post-war sculpture is in our show, Alina Shaposhnikov's sculpture lamp, Double Mouth on Phallus. From Shaposhnikov's most iconic and recognizable group of work, it was made during a significant period of creativity, her last decade in Paris, and brings together the influences of surrealism and pop. This work is particularly important as it radically juxtaposes her own body with a phallus and is one of only about 6 known sculpture lamps that she made which incorporate a phallus base. She is one of the most influential female artists in the post-war period, dying tragically young at the age of 43 in 1973. Gallery 3 is dominated by a textile sculpture by the Croatian artist Jagoda Bujic. With Sale, we see her early training in theater and stage set design. The monumental column of fabric seems to float in the room, in direct contrast to Fallen Angel, which hangs delicately from the ceiling. Bujic emerged from the former Yugoslavia, where there existed a rich Balkan tradition of textile weaving. Her work, which has been described as anti-tapestries, shows her fascination with what can be achieved in the 3-dimensional form, much like Levitus-Swiderska. With Dubrovnik, she creates an homage to her hometown, and it's a work which leads to the final artist in our exhibition, Polish artist Erna Rosenstein. Like Kolárova, who we looked at earlier, Rosenstein was famed for incorporating found objects in her work, as with I Want to Go Up, which incorporates the spent cap from a gun and a metal nut. Here, with the painting City, she captures a neighborhood in Warsaw. Rosenstein, like Awicka and Bujic, had very strong feelings and associations with her home, which led her to discover and use a new abstract vocabulary informed by the Surrealists and André Breton. The exhibition, which physically covers Eastern Europe's fraught geography and artistic landscape, illustrates the power and force of creative minds during traumatic and uncertain times. And we hope that this exhibition and the next 8 of On Hannah Arendt will show how artists have responded to this moment.